failure of the American economy in the Great Depression led to an intense questioning of American culture and traditional values and the American system generally. I mean, the whole promise of the American system was that we could all live good, fulfilling lives. Of course, by now we'd become heavily entrenched in consumerism and buying stuff. And the whole thing seemed to be a failure in the 1930s. It did not lead to a major questioning of consumerism. We did not go back to a self-sustaining system where you made your own stuff. It was still very much the idea was you needed to get money to buy things. The success ethic survives the idea that success equals happiness, but what is added to it is a significant distrust of big business and a new idea that the government has a role in providing some assistance to the people when they need help. But most Americans blame themselves. I think that's important to understand. There was a lot of reassurance that if you could just find a job, you could be successful. That people didn't really accept that maybe the whole system was a fraud. I'm not saying it is, but there was certainly the potential to believe that it was. And there was just, man, if I could just get a lucky break, I work hard, and I too could be living that middle-class American dream. And a great example of this is Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, which is published in 1936, is a huge bestseller. The idea that, man, if I could just do something right, if I could just figure out the secret to success, everything would be okay. When in reality that was pretty clearly untrue just because of the massive scale. It wasn't like the Americans of the 1930s were somehow more immoral or less capable or less competent than any other generation of Americans. It wasn't something within those people. It was a systematic problem. But people still tended to see it as some problem with themselves. And so they turned to distractions. Distractions like radio and the movies. Almost everyone had a radio. Even poor people who couldn't find jobs had gotten a radio in the 20s and held on to it. Even in rural areas where they didn't have electricity, they would hook a radio up to a car battery. Radio was a community event. You don't think about that today. Today we have our headphones and we listen to music and radio very much by ourselves. But back then everybody would crowd around the radio. You see this family crowded around the radio. There was news on the radio, but it was mostly escapist type stuff. Some of the most popular programs were Amos and Andy, which were two white guys who acted like black guys. Superman started out, was a comic book first, but was a huge success as a radio serial. Dick Tracy, The Lone Ranger, Jack Benny, Grace Allen, and George Burns were great comedians on the radio. Sports events would be broadcast on the radio. You might listen to the big college football game or the World Series or something like that. Major news events, the party conventions, the inauguration of the president, election coverage, of course. And there began to be these certain annual events that we all looked forward to, which we still do today very much, right? The World Series is a great example of this. The Academy Awards, the Democratic and Republican National Conventions, these became touchstones of the year. At this time of year, this thing happens, and we all tune in and listen to that. Radio also created a communal events in a way we'd never seen before. One of the things that happens now is when a big event happens, we all follow it together like one big family. And that really begins, you have to have a mass media to do that. And radio is the first real mass media that can be immediate like that. So millions of people around the country listened as the Hindenburg, the blimp, blew up in New Jersey in 1937, and they heard it happening real time. And even though only a few people were actually there, it became a nationally experienced communal event in American history. Another great example is the great director H.G. Wells before he was a director. He put on a radio presentation of War of the Worlds, which is a story of aliens invading Earth, but he did it as if he were a news broadcaster, and these events were actually happening. And this was Halloween night on 1938. And people freaked out. People believed it was true. In fact, we have reports of people committing suicide so the aliens didn't get them. But these communal events that we all experience live as they're happening are something radio brings us. And of course, we expect this today. Recently, we've seen, for example, the Arab Spring is something you might have turned on and watched your TV. 9/11, of course, not too long ago. Today, that's kind of very much a part of our culture, but it was new back then. And we went to the movies. The movies had sagged, but when the economy first collapsed, but by the mid-1930s, they were back and bigger than ever. Color and sound have become regular things. They would give away dishes at the movies too, by the way. There would always be like certain nights where you could go and they would give away something. And one of the things they would do is they would give away a different dish in a set every week. And so you would go every Wednesday night or whatever it was, and you could get dishes. That's the way they did it. The studio system and its commissioner, Hayes, assured that movies would not offend anybody and there would be nothing that they considered at the time upsetting them. The bad guy had to lose. You couldn't show any sex. That sort of thing. Apparently it was okay to show a man hitting a woman, as we see James Cagney doing there at the bottom. But the movies were very bland on purpose because they didn't want to upset anybody. And here you see some of the great movies of the period. Screwball comedies like the Marx Brothers, musicals, gangster movies were extremely popular. That black and white one in the top middle there is The Grapes of Wrath, which is a good movie, but you should really read the book. Frank Capra kind of became his own brand of Americanism, in a way, with his story of decent, normal folks fighting a system that is bigger than them and very often corrupt. His classics like Meet John Doe or Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Of course, It's a Wonderful Life is a Frank Capra movie, if you've ever seen that around Christmas. It Happened One Night, another great movie. But these really created a whole new flavor of America that was, quite frankly, fairly socialist. Disney is founded around this time and gets into the movie business. Mickey Mouse, of course, shows up in theaters as a short little trailer before other shows. But the first Disney movie, feature-length movie, is Snow White, which comes out in 1937, which is followed by Dumbo, Pinocchio, Bambi, Fantasia. And Disney becomes really at the heart of this boom in movies and, of course, is still there today. Such American classics like The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind both come out in 1939. Both really pioneer, really great, vibrant use of color. We should also mention women in film. There were two types of women in film. There was the dedicated wife girlfriend, the kind of good all-American girl, the girl next door as they call. And then there was the flirty vamp. The kind of trashy, easy woman who gave you the idea that if you met her on the street one day, you could probably have her. You couldn't, obviously, but that was the idea they were trying to establish. Mae West is maybe the prototype of that. She has lines like, you know how to whistle, just put your lips together and blow, which would have considered to be very racist at the time. Blacks show up in movies, but only in subservient roles. You think of Scarlett O'Hara's maid, winning Best Supporting Actress for Gone with the Wind. But again, look at the role the black actress is in. She's a servant. Journalism can reflect radicalism and disillusionment missing in radio and film, who tried to keep everything bland. But of course, it can also be escapism as well. I should say journalism and literature. Gone with the Wind is published in 1936, and that's pretty pure escapism right there. Life begins publication in 1936, and it brings really high-quality photography to America. In a time before the Internet, Life was an amazing thing. It was basically a picture book that came out, I believe it's every week. It was weekly, yeah. And so you could see things from around the country, around the world that you wouldn't be able to see otherwise. It was mostly going to be focused on things like sports. You see Ted Williams down there. And high society. I think that's Ted. John Dos Passos will write a classic trilogy of novels, USA, where he attacks American materialism and the idea that somehow we can buy our way to happiness. And so again, we see those critics of the material society continuing on into the 1930s.